Hello and welcome to everybody to this webinar session, Atempo session on Lina, protection solution for endpoint data, particularly for desktop, laptops, and file servers. We have a 30-minute session today, and I'm joined by Sylvie Margot, who's product manager for Lina. Hi, Sylvie.
Hello, Nick. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. And yourself?
Pretty good, thank you.
Okay, so Sylvie will be taking us through 25 minutes, 30 minutes of presentation. We'll take a few questions at the end if we have some time. Otherwise, we'll note the questions down and get back to you. And if you need to contact us, we'll give you some contact details. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Sylvie and enjoy the presentation. And thanks also for being here today.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here with you today to share some information about Lina. So here is the agenda I propose for today's session. I'm going to say a few words about Atempo and our solution. Then I'll talk about the specific issues with endpoint backup and how Lina will be taking care of these needs. Then I'll dive into Lina's architecture and technology. I will give you our approach about user experience and look through the various interfaces that are available to our users. Then I will go through 2 customer cases just to put things into perspective and look at how some of our customers are using our solution. And we'll have a little time for questions at the end of the session.
I'll just jump in there again, Sylvie. If you do have any questions, if you could use the chat in Zoom, that's probably the easiest because there are quite a few people connected. So if you can write your questions down.
Very well.
Thank you.
So Atempo has more than 25 years of experience in the field of data protection. We have more than 2,000 customers around the world. We've always been in the business of data protection, and we are well known for innovation in that field. Thanks to the good relationship we have with our customers, we've stayed close to answering their needs, and we offer solutions to preserve your enterprise data ecosystem. The first product we developed back then, 25 years ago, was Time Navigator, also known as Tina, which is dedicated to the backup of physical and virtual server and application, as well as major databases. Then came ADA to archive data for mid and long-term preservation. Then ADA turned into Myria. Myria is our latest platform dedicated to the backup, migration, copy of very large unstructured data sets. Then came Lina, so that we are going to be discussing today, for the backup in real time of laptops, desktops, and file server. We also have Backstone, which is an all-in-one appliance to back up all your data. Let's now look at why you may want to use Live Navigator and for what needs. A few stats, not to scare you away, but just because stats are a good way to evaluate the risk situation for your data and also to put endpoint backup needs in perspective. So today, we know that about 55% of enterprises have no laptop backup solution in place. So that doesn't mean that they have no backup in place at all. They usually already have a server backup solution, but not necessarily an endpoint solution, which is kind of risky when knowing that about 38% of all corporate data reside exclusively on laptops. If you lose a laptop, you lose your data. More than 12,000 computer laptops are left in airport every week around the world. That's not a very encouraging statistics. Not to mention cyber criminal attacks, which are in the news every other week, it seems. And for small and medium businesses, they've been multiplied by 8 between 2015 and 2017. And finally, 90% of stolen laptops are never recovered, which means that the data they hold are gone with them. So that says a lot about the need for endpoint backup. Unsurprisingly, the consequences of the lack of endpoint backup is, unfortunately, the loss of data and all that it entails. Data loss, first of all, which usually means monetary loss due to the time spent trying to recreate the lost data, but also lost productivity since users have no data to work with. And finally, possibly a degraded brand image if you cannot serve your customers' need for any length of time. In fact, stats say that 40% of companies that have suffered a data loss followed by a data unavailability of more than 48 hours will file for bankruptcy within the next 6 months. So here's what Lina can help you with. A human error, of course, that happens more often than we think. If a user deletes or overwrites his files by mistake, so Lina will allow him or her to retrieve a previous version of their data. Viral attack, we mentioned that before. We're all aware by now of the damage they can cause. So Lina will allow you to restore at a specific date, let's say 3 days ago or a week ago, before the attack took place. For material failure and other losses, Lina can rebuild an entire machine, including the operating system, application, and all the data all at once. And finally, for users that are not on the central site, Lina will recover their lost file by way of the web restore from anywhere in the world. So let's look at the architecture and technology of Lina. So basically, that's how Lina is structured. On your central site, you will install a server to back up all the machines that are present on your central site. If you have remote sites with a private connection to the central site, for instance, a VPN, you will be able to restore them on the server in the central site as well. But you will also be able to back up users that are connected to the central site via a public internet network. In that case, you will have to put in place a reverse proxy configuration to allow roaming users to safely connect to the server in the central site. So one of Lina's strong points is the ability to perform continuous data protection. As soon as a file is created or modified, Lina detects that it must be backed up. It is cut out in small blocks that are sent to the repository on the server. This means that you have no more planning to do. What you have to choose is the recovery time objective, or RPO, that is between 1 minute and 1 day, depending on your infrastructure. You may want to increase the RPO to save resources. And this allows us to create a separate backup session to make sure that we have a consistent backup of all the files in your machine at any given point. So continuous data protection also means that you do not have to worry about backup windows that are getting out of control. Finally, backup takes place in the background. This way, your users can keep using their machine all the time without being disturbed by the backup. And Lina will keep track of several versions of your files, so to ensure versioning, depending on the retention that you will have set. So once the files are cut out in blocks, not all the blocks are sent to the server, since blocks are deduplicated. The first deduplication takes place on the agent. The agent has a little database that keeps track of all the blocks that have already been sent, and the agent verifies that the block has not already been sent before sending it again. That's the first level of deduplication on the source. Then there is also a deduplication between agents. So for instance, if an agent has already sent a block, the next agent over is going to query the server to make sure that this block does not already exist. In this way, at the end of the process, the repository on the server is made of only unique and single blocks. The server is going to keep track though, of all the blocks location, how many times they are used, and by what agent, to make sure that they can be restored properly. As a result, we reduce the number of blocks that are sent over the network, and we reduce the number of blocks that are stored in the repository. Another strong point of Lina is its centralized administration. That means that you can decide to set all the policies and rules at the server level and apply them to your user's machine and leave them no freedom at all to choose what and how to back up. At the opposite, you can set minimal rules and let the users do what they want with these rules. You can also delegate administration rights to operators who will be able to perform daily tasks such as adding a new machine, verify the backup status, but they won't be able to create any new strategies or backup rules. That means that you keep the control of all the backup happening on your server. So the way you decide what's going to be backup is firstly with the strategies that are basically going to tell how to back up your data. And then on the next slide, you will see the backup policies that are going to define what to back up on your agents. So for the strategies, you can define such things as the retention, the quotas, if you want to limit the volume or number of files that are backed up on a single machine. This will give you control over your storage space needs. You can decide also what level of rights you will give the users to let them change settings on their machines or not. You can set the RPO for the agent. If you set alerts, then you will receive a mail when a machine has not been backed up for a set number of days. You can also define parameters such as the compression algorithm to use. You can limit the bandwidth used by agent. And you can decide also whether or not you want to encrypt data during their transfer from the agent to the server repository. The protection policies, the way to decide what data to back up is, first of all, you are going to, to choose the folder structure that you're going to back up by indicating their path. Then on this path, you are going to decide which files you want to include or exclude from the backup. And finally, you're going to decide if you allow users to change that rule, or if you want the folders backed up no matter what, without any final user's input. You can also create several tenants on your server if you so desire. For instance, if you want a strict separation between different services in your enterprise, or if you are a software as a service provider to separate your customers, then there is no sharing between the different tenants. All the strategies, the rules you set, the backup policies are going to be strictly, they're going to belong strictly to one tenant and will not be shared by the other tenants. The benefits of deduplication, though, is going to apply to the entire server. So deduplication is going to take place between all the blocks from all the tenants. This will increase the deduplication in the end. So let's talk now about the user experience. The philosophy of the product has always been to provide as much autonomy to users as possible. So users have access to several interfaces to perform restore, of course, but also to modify their configuration if the administrator has allowed them to, and to supervise their own backups so they can verify that there are no alerts raised on their machine, Or for instance, if an upgrade is available, they will also receive a little alert. There are several ways that users can restore their data. First of all, for Windows and macOS agent, we have integrated all the Live Navigator function in the Windows Explorer or the Finder. So you can do a right click, and right from there, you can see all the different versions of a file if you want to restore a previous version, for instance, or you can launch a folder backup, the folder and all its subfolders. You can also verify if a file is being backed up or not. Then you can also use a wizard to help you, to guide you through the recovery process. This is especially useful if you're not sure exactly where your file is. The wizard is going to ask you several questions about the location of your file, the type of file it is, the date of the last backup. And each time, with all the answer you provide, it's going to narrow down the list of files that are eligible for restore. And then you will choose from that list the file you want to restore. You choose the version of the file you want to restore. You can also decide if you want to restore the file in its original location or somewhere else. You can decide what behavior to adopt if the file already exists. So you can either create a copy of the file, replace the file, or do nothing at all. And then you can also restore your file by using the browse and search interface, which is basically you're going to be browsing through your backed up files as if you were browsing a file system. You can go down into the file structure of your backed up file. And then you can choose which files or which folder you want to back up. Another way to restore your file is through the web restore. The web restore really allows you to download locally your files. So wherever you are in the world, if you have a web browser and you have the proper connection information, you will be able to download the file that you need. The web restore can also be performed by the administrator. The administrator can restore one agent or multiple agents at once. The web restore can also function via the creation of a link. Instead of downloading directly your file to restore, you can just create a link and send the link to one of your users, for instance, and this person will be able then to download the file on his or her local machine. We have several advanced restore operations as well that you can perform. Time navigation, to begin with, will have two major advantages. First of all, you can set a beginning date and an end date and compare between those dates what happened, and I'll give you an idea of what happened between the beginning and the end of the date. You will see all the files that were created, modified, or deleted between those two dates. On the screen capture here, we see that the file called Lina sales presentation was created between and backed up between those 2 days. And the other file, the Live Navigator MHT file, was deleted during those 2 days, during this interval. What you can do also with the time navigation is you can synchronize all your backup at a certain date. So if you want to restore several folders, for instance, you will be sure that they are all consistent with the date that you select. You can perform cross-restore. So you can, first of all, restore on your machine files that were backed up on a different one. Secondly, you can trigger the backup on a distant machine of the files that were either backed up on that machine or on a different one. And finally, you can also restore file from an alternate server. If you have performed a replication, for instance, and the primary server is not available, you will be able to restore your file from the secondary one. I mentioned before the bare metal restore. So if you have activated that option, you can perform a complete rebuild of your machine, which will include the OS, the partition of your disk, and all the data that was backed up on the machine. This is the same feature that will allow you to restore the Microsoft SQL Server applications. And in order to trigger the bare metal restore backup, you just have to check one box when you create your backup policy, and to make sure that the backup will include all the files necessary to recreate the OS, the partition, and all the data. And actually, an alternative to the bare metal restore would be if you lose a machine to reinstall it from a ghost system, for instance, and then cross-restore all the data from the agent. This way, even if you didn't check the bare metal restore option, you can still restore all the data from one machine to another. We also have an agent dedicated to Synology NAS, so that you can restore data from a Synology NAS just like you would with any other agent. Now, to follow what's happening on your server, Lina provides several monitoring and statistical information. For instance, you can follow all the backup and restore operation. You can also check the replication advancement. This will tell you if there is a delay between the status of the primary server and the secondary server, if there's a delay in the replication. You can also check statistics, of course, that will give you information on the evolution of the volume, protected volume, the number of objects that you have protected on all the machines. And you can also see statistics for special agent, that the one that has the most voluminous data backed up, and also focus on the larger and most frequently modified files. Here are a few metrics that are issued from benchmark we performed and also from customer feedback. So we have seen agents with up to 22 million files backed up. We have seen processing speed of up to 100 megabytes per second for backups. And also we have seen sustained backup speed of 25 megabytes per second on a 1 gigabyte Ethernet network. That's for the agent part. And for the server, we have seen backup throughput of up to 1 terabyte of native data per hour. Here is a list of all the operating systems we support. So for the server, on the Windows server we support, and the Linux. And for the agent, same thing, we support a lot of Windows, Linux, and Mac OS distribution. For the Synology, it's a processor family that we support. So all the Intel processors, the Armada 38X, and the Armada XP processors, as well as the DS111, 1010, and 1513. I'm going to show you two customer cases just to put things in perspective a little bit and see how our customers are using our solution. So our first customer is in the sporting goods industry. And this is a typical case where they had server backup in place, but no endpoint backup. And one day, one of their executives lost his laptop. He had unique data on this laptop that were not copied onto a server. And thus, they lost some files. At that point, they decided to install an endpoint backup solution. So the solution was for about 100 laptops, mostly for salespeople and executives. So they had a lot of mobile users. So all those laptops are now backed up with Lina via one of our partners that is a service provider. So the server is kept on-premise in their location, but the repository is in a cloud that's managed by the software as a service provider. They have set up a reverse proxy to allow access from roaming laptops to make sure that the access was secured for mobile users. Our second customer case is a customer that's in the perfume industry. And that's a good example of a worldwide deployment. So they have about 800 machines spread out all over the world into 18 different sites, plus a central site with about 1,200 machines. So what they did is they installed a server on the central site for the 1,200 machines, and then they cloned that server, one server in each of the 18 sites. So this way they were sure to have the exact same configuration on the central server and on all the remote server. So as a wrap-up of the presentation, here is a reminder of the features that are most sought after by enterprises looking for an endpoint backup solution. Of course, we have made a point at Atempo to make sure that all were included in Lina, to make sure that we brought you the best possible service for your data. Now we have a few minutes left for questions. Thank you for your participation.
Thanks very much, Sylvie. Yeah, we have a few questions, so I'll try and run through. Maybe we won't have the time to look at every question, but as I promised, we'll get back to you by email if there are still outstanding questions. And I'll leave the session open for a short time, so you can continue to ask questions if you want. We have, first of all, a question on deduplication. That's something that you mentioned, Sylvie. Is it possible to give us some idea of the, obviously deduplication depends on so many factors, but the average rate of deduplication for a customer? Is it too?
There is really no such thing as an average rate. We've had, depending on the data, sometimes it can go up to 50 to 1, or sometimes it's like 7 or 8 to 1. It's really very dependent on the type of data.
Okay. And also a question about the possibility of turning dedupe off, I guess in the event of you requiring additional resources or better performance for your backups. Is that something that we do with Lina? Can you turn it off when you're backing up?
The duplication?
Yeah.
There is really no reason for turning off the deduplication. But the way you can influence the deduplication is if you modify the block size. So the bigger the block size, the less likely they are to be already present. So the lower deduplication ratio you will have.
Okay. In terms of file versioning, you mentioned time navigation, the fact that you can navigate and choose the time that you want to restore backed up data from. Does Lina use specific file versioning? Does it rename the files with a timestamp, or is it always the identical file each time that you want to restore?
So actually what happens is each time you create a new version of the file, the last version of the file is kept forever. There is no retention on that one. Okay, but the older version are the ones that are going to be retentioned. So if you set a retention of 8 days, for instance, the older version that are older than 8 days are not going to be kept.
Okay.
That answer your question?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. We have a couple of questions on the competition. Maybe it's difficult to go into comparisons between two different products, but a question about Tivoli CDP, for example. Obviously, Lina is an enterprise class endpoint protection solution. Maybe you could just say a few words on the competition, or would it be easier to answer by email? The pros and cons of each solution.
I'm afraid I'm not going to be very objective if I go into that, Nick. So, but you can find a lot of information on the website, concerning the competition.
Okay. There's a question about the maximum number of agents per server. You said in the final example there were 1,200 agents on the central site. Is that like a full maximum? Would you say you could do more?
No, we can go all the way to 2,000 agents per server, or 50 terabytes of blocks in the repository. So you can go a lot more than 1,200 actually.
Okay. All right, we have okay, one or two more technical questions that I'm thinking Sylvie will probably be better off answering by email, reading between the lines. Question on encryption and the backup processes as well. So I think we'll leave those for an email. There's one also on Synology, but I think you mentioned that in a slide as well, about the different compatibility and so on with that particular NAS.
Yes.
Yeah. Just maybe one final point. You talked about Live Navigator and Lina. So what's the final name of the product then? Can we use both, or is it really Lina?
Well, you can use both. Okay. I will understand, but we have recently decided to go with the Lina name just to comply with what we've been doing between Time Navigator and Tina, and our other products are named Ada, Miria, so we wanted to be more homogeneous with the naming of the products. That's why we decided to go with Lina, that stands for Live Navigator.
Right, so it's just an alignment with the other products.
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
Understood. Okay, fine. Of course, we are into version 5 now of Lina, which just came out a couple of weeks ago, and some of the screen captures that we have here will evolve in a future version. So we're upgrading the interfaces as well with this particular version.
Yeah, we did all the administration interface upgrade with version 5, and our next step is to do all the agent interfaces with the same technology, so HTML5, and with the same looks and colors.
Okay, very good. Right, well, I think we'll stop there. We've used up our time. I'd like to thank you all for participating and for some of the questions that we've been able to answer, and for others that we will answer later. I'll also provide the presentation, Sylvie's presentation, by an email later today or early tomorrow at the latest, so you can have access to the presentation. And Sylvie's email is on the screen, so if you have any questions,
don't hesitate.
Right, okay. Thanks, Sylvie. Thanks to everyone.
Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.